Tonight, the mountains of Montana were silent, but not at peace. The wind pressed against the old timber walls of a cabin, half buried in snow, whispering through the cracks, like ghosts that refused to rest. Inside, the only light came from a dying fire, its orange glow trembling over the face of a man who had seen too many wars. His name was Jonas Keene, 44, a veteran who had outlived the sound of gunfire, but not its echo. His companions were two loyal souls who never left his side: Atlas, a weathered German shepherd with a soldier's discipline, and Luna, a blue-eyed husky whose quiet intuition had saved him more than once. For years, Jonas had lived here in solitude, rebuilding his life, one quiet sunrise at a time. But tonight, something had shifted. Atlas paced by the hearth, tense, alert, growling low, as if he sensed a presence beyond the frozen glass. Luna's fur bristled, her eyes locked on a faded photograph, resting on the table, one Jonas hadn't touched since his wife Clara died in what they called an accident. The firelight flickered across her smiling face, and for a second it revealed something, a faint shimmer on the photo's back, invisible. Until this very moment. Jonas leaned closer, heart pounding. There, beneath the ashes of grief, numbers began to appear, coordinates. They pulsed like a heartbeat, leading him somewhere he never wanted to return, the battlefield of truth. Tonight, the war he thought was over was about to begin again, and this time he wouldn't fight it alone. Jonas stared at the faint coordinates burned into the back of the photograph, the ghostly shimmer pulsing under the light like something alive. His breath came shallow, his pulse quickened. For a long moment he didn't move. The fire cracked, once a sharp sound that made Atlas growl again. Luna pressed close to Jonas's leg, whining softly, her icy blue eyes reflecting the light from the stove. Jonas flipped the photo over his fingers, trembling slightly. Clara's smile stared back at him, bright, fearless, caught forever at the summit she loved. The thought that she had been up there alone moments before she fell twisted something inside him that hadn't healed since the day he buried her. He traced the invisible code again, whispering the numbers under his breath. They weren't random, they were precise. Coordinates. A location. Clara had left them there for him. But why? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wood floor. Atlas barked, once sharp and questioning. Jonas's eyes darted to the window, to the dark shapes of the pines swaying under the moonlight. He could feel it, the shift. The silence outside was no longer peace. It was a pause before something moved. He took a slow breath and crossed the room, grabbing the old flashlight from the shelf. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing across the framed photos on the wall. Him and Clara in uniform. The three of them, Jonas, Atlas, and Luna, camping by the river. And one photo he'd never hung. The one where Clara stood beside a research team under a government tent with the logo blacked out by marker. She'd said it was fieldwork. He'd believed her. The dogs followed him as he opened the door and stepped into the cold. The air hit him like a knife. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked to the edge of the porch. He lifted his flashlight toward the tree line. The forest loomed dark and endless, whispering secrets in the wind. Then, movement. A shadow slipped between the trees, too quick, too deliberate. Atlas's growl deepened into a warning rumble, and Luna's ears went rigid. Jonas froze, flashlight, steady, eyes narrowing. He waited, counting the seconds the way soldiers do when death might be watching. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Only the sound of wind and the distant creak of ice shifting in the valley. He backed inside, closing the door quietly, his mind racing. He had lived 6 years in this cabin and knew every sound it made. That one had been different too. Careful, too human. He tossed another log into the stove, grabbed the photo again, and stared at the coordinates until they blurred. The soldier in him, the man he'd tried to bury under layers of peace and grief, was already coming back. He grabbed a pen and wrote the numbers on his palm. Then, moving with a precision that came from habit, he pulled the duffel bag from under the bed and began packing flashlight, water, first aid kit, extra rounds for the revolver. He kept locked away but never forgot how to use. Atlas sat by the door, watching him silently. Luna circled near the window, her fur puffed out, her body coiled tight. Jonas stopped long enough to look around the cabin. The quiet space that had once been sanctuary now felt like a cage. Every wall, every shadow carried Clara's ghost. He pulled on his heavy coat, slung the rifle across his shoulder, and slipped the photo into his pocket. "Let's go," he murmured. Atlas rose instantly, tail low, ready. Luna followed, silent as snow. Outside, the pickup's engine coughed to life, the headlights carving twin beams through the swirling frost. As the truck rumbled down the frozen dirt road, Jonas tried to steady his breathing. The dashboard clock blinked, 2:47 a.m. He drove south, following the highway that wound through the Blackfoot Range. The coordinates replayed in his mind like a chant, the rhythm of obsession. He didn't know what he would find, but something inside him already knew this wasn't an accident. Clara had been too careful, too brilliant, to die from a slip. He remembered her hands steady, even when the mountain winds screamed. She'd been strong, but there had been a fear in her eyes near the end, a flicker she'd tried to hide. A set of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Jonas glanced back. A single vehicle, black low, moving fast. He slowed. The car slowed too. A cold ripple went through him. Atlas, lying across the seat, lifted his head and gave a low growl. Luna whined softly, restless. The truck behind them kept distance, too perfect, too patient. Jonas tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He'd played this game before. He knew a tale when he saw one. He took a sudden right turn onto a side road, tires biting into the icy gravel. The headlights followed, weaving through the dark like a predator's eyes. Jonas floored the gas. The old pickup roared, fishtailing through the snow, chunks of ice spraying from its tires. Atlas braced his paws against the dashboard, barking, once ready, alive. Luna turned, watching through the back window, her breath fogging the glass. The black car stayed on him, headlights bouncing over the uneven road. Jonas's pulse thundered. His mind shifted to survival mode. Every decision became instinct, every movement calculated. Up ahead, a narrow logging trail split off the main path, a route he knew from years of hunting. He yanked the wheel hard and plunged into the trail, the truck jolting violently as branches scraped its sides. Snow exploded around them, visibility gone. He cut the headlights and coasted in darkness, the engine humming low. Behind him, the other car barreled past, the turn, its light disappearing into the night. Jonas stopped the silence, slamming back down. For a moment, he just sat there, chest heaving, the sound of his heartbeat loud in his ears. Then he let out a slow breath, leaned back, and looked at the photo again. Atlas nudged his arm, gently, tail wagging, once a question in his dark eyes. "Yeah," Jonas said quietly. "I know, boy. She's leading us somewhere." He turned the key again. The engine rumbled back to life. An hour later, dawn broke over the horizon, soft gold slicing through the mist. The coordinates led him toward an old access road, nearly swallowed by snowdrifts and pine roots. At its end lay nothing on the map, just blank wilderness. But as he pulled to a stop, something caught his eye, a pattern of tire tracks, fresh and deep, cutting into the snow. He stepped out, the crunch echoing in the cold. Atlas and Luna bounded out beside him, noses to the ground, alert. Jonas looked at the photo one more time, at Clara's smile, frozen in sunlight. "If this is where you wanted me to go," he whispered, "then I'll see it through." The forest before him was still and waiting, the air heavy with unspoken truth. He slung his rifle, checked the compass, and started walking. Atlas moved ahead, Luna close behind, the three of them disappearing into the endless white. For 6 months, Jonas had begged the world for silence. Now that silence was over. Somewhere in those coordinates lay the answer, and maybe the people who had turned his wife's life into a cover story. The soldier was back, and the hunt had begun. The forest swallowed them whole. The moment Jonas left the truck behind, the world turned to silence and frost. The snow came up to his boots, crunching softly under each careful step. Atlas ranged ahead, his black and tan coat ghosting between the trees, every muscle coiled tight. Luna stayed closer, her pale fur blending almost perfectly with the morning light, ears flicking at every sound. Jonas moved like a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. Slow, deliberate, alert. But under the discipline, something raw burned through him. Those coordinates weren't just numbers, they were a pulse, dragging him forward through the cold, towards something he could feel waiting. After a mile, the narrow trail began to curve upward. The pines thinned, and through the mist he caught sight of it, a break in the forest, a clearing where the snow had been flattened by heavy tires. Jonas crouched, pressing a glove to the ground. The tracks were deep and sharp-edged. Recent, too recent. He traced the tread with his finger, memorizing the pattern. Not civilian, tactical. He knew the difference. His gut twisted. Someone else had been here, and not long ago. Atlas barked once low and cautious, drawing his attention to a half-buried object at the edge of the clearing. Jonas brushed away the snow, revealing a splintered wooden post with faded paint. Restricted area, government property. His breath froze in the air. Clara's coordinates had led him straight to a place she'd never been supposed to find. Or maybe she had. He straightened slowly, scanning the perimeter. The tree line looked ordinary, but the longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. The silence was too measured. Somewhere out there, someone was listening. He pulled the small field binoculars from his coat and lifted them. Beyond the clearing, half hidden among the trees, a shape emerged, a steel structure, squat and ugly like a bunker, half swallowed by the earth. Faint wisps of smoke rose from a vent, vanishing into the cold air. His stomach clenched. The place was alive. Atlas growled, his tail stiff. Luna pressed her head against Jonas's hand. Sensing the tension, he lowered the binoculars and took a steadying breath. "Easy," he whispered. But his own pulse betrayed the word. He scanned for cameras, wires, anything reflective. Nothing. Whoever ran this site knew how to stay invisible. Jonas took a step forward, then froze as the faint hum of an engine reached him. He ducked behind a fallen tree just as two dark SUVs rolled into the clearing. The vehicles stopped near the bunker entrance. 4 men stepped out, heavy parkas, mirrored glasses, rifles slung low. Their movements were clean, practiced, professional. Military contractors, not park rangers. Jonas's blood went cold. He watched as one of the men opened the back of the SUV and hauled out a crate marked with a red triangle symbol he recognized instantly. EtherCorp. His chest tightened. Clara had been working for them, investigating them. And now their logo sat gleaming in the snow like a brand. Jonas gritted his teeth. The men carried the crate into the bunker, vanishing behind a thick metal door. When it shut, the sound echoed through the forest like the closing of a tomb. He waited until the clearing was empty again, until the sound of the engines faded into nothing. Then he moved. Every step was silent, measured, purposeful. He made his way along the perimeter, studying the structure. There were no visible security systems, no wires, no cameras, but he trusted his instincts more than his eyes. The building was a trap. He circled until he found what he was looking for. A maintenance hatch, half buried under a snowdrift. He brushed the snow aside, revealing a small keypad covered in frost. The paint had chipped away, but one word was still visible beneath the grime. Ether. A shock ran through him. This was it. Clara had been here. Maybe not physically, but this was the kind of place she'd been hunting. He touched the keypad, feeling the cold bite through his gloves. Atlas paced behind him, restless, and Luna whined softly, her nose pressed to the ground. "Something's under here," Jonas muttered. He dropped to one knee and started clearing the snow faster. His hand struck something solid metal. A small box no bigger than a fist, sealed tight with tape. He peeled it open. Inside lay a microdrive wrapped in plastic, marked with a single letter in Clara's handwriting. J. His heart kicked against his ribs. She had been here. She had left this for him. But the thought barely formed before a sharp crack split the air. The sound of a branch snapping under weight. Jonas spun, rifle, raised body dropping instinctively into a crouch. Atlas was already growling. Luna's teeth bared the sound, low and dangerous. Through the trees, a shape moved fast, too smooth to be an animal. Jonas's finger tightened on the trigger. Then a flash of light cut through the shadows, a reflection off metal. Scope glare. Sniper. "Down," Jonas hissed. He dove behind a tree as the shot ripped through the air. The bark exploded inches from his head, splinters stinging his cheek. Atlas lunged forward, dragging Luna behind cover. Another shot followed this one, ricocheting off a rock. Jonas rolled to the side, heart-pounding snow bursting around him. He peered through the scope of his rifle, scanning for movement. Nothing. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. The shots weren't meant to kill. They were meant to herd him away from the bunker. Jonas gritted his teeth and crawled backward, keeping his rifle trained on the tree line. When he reached the ridge, he gave a sharp whistle. Atlas bolted first, Luna close behind. They sprinted through the snow, weaving between trees as another shot cracked the air. A branch above them splintered and fell. Jonas didn't look back. He ran until the gunfire faded into the distance, and the only sound was his own ragged breathing. They stopped near a frozen creek sheltered by an overhang of rock. Jonas collapsed against the stone chest, heaving the world spinning with adrenaline. Atlas stood guard at the mouth of the hollow teeth, bared every muscle vibrating with energy. Luna pressed against Jonas's knee, eyes wide and uncertain. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the drive still clutched in his glove. "They knew I'd come," he muttered. "They were waiting." He turned the drive over the tiny letter J, catching the weak light. Clara had hidden this under a corporate bunker, surrounded by armed men. She must have known what it contained, and that it could get her killed. Jonas swallowed hard. The truth was no longer abstract. It was physical, cold in his hand. He thought of her voice, soft but unyielding, saying, "Some things are worth the fight, Jonas, even when you've stopped believing in one." The memory hit like a blade to the chest. He closed his eyes for a second, then forced himself upright. "We're not done," he said aloud, voice hoarse but steady. Atlas's ears flicked toward him. Luna's tail gave a faint twitch. The dogs knew. They always did. Jonas tucked the drive into his coat, slung the rifle across his shoulder, and started back toward the trail. The cold bit deep, but he didn't feel it. The fear had burned away, replaced by something cleaner, harder: purpose. Somewhere out there, someone had killed his wife to keep a secret buried. Now he had the first piece of proof she'd left behind. As the wind picked up, Jonas turned for one last look at the clearing below. The bunker sat silent, smoke curling lazily from its vent, pretending innocence. But he saw it for what it was, now a wound in the earth, festering with lies. He whispered under his breath, a promise carried by the wind. "You didn't die for nothing, Clara. I'll finish what you started." Then he walked into the trees, his dogs flanking him like ghosts, their tracks vanishing into the snow behind them. By the time Jonas reached the end of the trail, the light was dying. The forest opened into a narrow valley where the snow thinned and the scent of smoke drifted on the wind, wood smoke, not diesel. Civilization, but quiet, hidden. He crouched behind a ridge, scanning the valley floor. Tucked between the trees were several log cabins connected by narrow footpaths. Faint lights glowed behind shuttered windows. A tall fence ringed the area, topped with crude barbed wire. It wasn't a settlement. It was a fortress pretending to be forgotten. Atlas let out a low growl. Luna's tail stiffened. Jonas steadied them with a gesture, eyes narrowing, as a figure moved near the gate. A man with a rifle slung over his shoulder, walking with military precision. Jonas's pulse ticked upward. Whoever these people were, they weren't locals. He adjusted his scope and zoomed in. The man was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a hard-lined face and sharp, searching eyes. He wore a parka, marked with the same faded insignia he'd once seen on Clara's field gear. He whispered to himself, "You knew this place." He needed to get closer. He waited until the patrol turned away, then motioned to the dogs. They moved silently down the slope, weaving through snow-draped trees. Every step felt like walking deeper into Clara's shadow. When he reached the fence, he found a gap where the wire had rusted away. He slid through first, then Atlas and Luna followed. The compound was still, except for the crunch of distant boots. Jonas moved toward the largest cabin, drawn by a faint golden light spilling through the cracks in its shutters. Then came the voice. "That's far enough." Jonas froze. The tone was calm, commanding. He turned slowly, rifle half raised. Two men had stepped out from the dark rifles aimed squarely at his chest. Atlas bristled instantly. Luna's growl a low hum of warning. Jonas raised one hand, palm out. "I'm not here to start a fight," he said, voice steady. My name's Jonas Keene. I'm looking for someone. Clara Keene. The name cut through the air like a shot. The men exchanged a glance, uneasy, startled. One of them spoke into a radio, murmured something Jonas couldn't catch. A moment later, the older man from the gate approached, his breath fogging in the cold. You said Clara Keene. His voice was low-weighted, with something that wasn't disbelief, but pain. Jonas nodded slowly. She was my wife. For a heartbeat silence. Then the older man gave a small, weary nod. Lower your weapon, he told his men. He's not our enemy. Jonas followed him inside. The warmth of the cabin hit like a wave, wood smoke, coffee, the faint scent of pine. Inside, a handful of people sat around a long table. Their faces were pale, worn, frightened, the kind of fear that had gone on too long. Jonas's eyes moved across them. Two young women, an old man with trembling hands, a middle-aged couple whispering to each other. They all looked up when he entered, their expressions tightening with hope and dread. The older man set his rifle aside and extended a hand. My name's Marcus Rowe, he said. Clara spoke about you. Jonas didn't move. Spoke about me, his voice cracked on the words. Marcus nodded slowly. She trusted you. But she couldn't risk telling you everything. If she had, they would have used you to find us. Jonas's jaw tightened. Who is they? Marcus hesitated, then motioned toward the table. Sit. You deserve to hear it all. Jonas sat, the chair creaking under his weight. Atlas lay at his feet, eyes fixed on the door. Luna pressed close to his side, her warmth grounding him. Marcus poured him a cup of coffee, his hands steady despite the tension in his voice. Clara wasn't working for EtherCorp, Marcus said. She was working against them. We all were. Jonas blinked. The words didn't register at first. Against them, she was a researcher. She was a whistleblower, Marcus corrected. She uncovered something called the Ether Protocol, a black project hidden inside their biotech division. They were developing chemical compounds meant to sabotage materials and erase evidence of mechanical failure. To anyone else, it looked like bad luck, human error, but it was murder dressed as science. Clara found proof. Jonas stared at the steaming mug in front of him, and they killed her for it. Marcus met his eyes. Yes, they made it look like an accident on the ridge. She was never alone up there. One of their security teams followed her trail. We intercepted the satellite logs later. They sabotaged her climbing gear. You were meant to believe it was the mountain that took her. Jonas's throat closed. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He had told himself every night that she'd slipped, that it had been no one's fault. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice raw. Marcus's expression softened. Because she asked me not to. You were still fighting your own war, Jonas. PTSD, medication isolation. She didn't want to drag you into another battlefield. She said you'd already paid enough. Jonas looked away, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Guilt swelled in his chest like a living thing. And what about now? Marcus sighed. Now Ether is cleaning house. They're hunting down anyone who worked with her. This compound is what's left of her network. Journalists, scientists, whistleblowers. We've been in hiding since she died. Jonas's head spun. He looked around the room at the faces, watching him, haunted, hopeful. He saw Clara in all of them, the courage, the fear. It took a long breath. She left something for me, he said finally. A drive, hidden near one of their bunkers. Marcus's eyes widened. You found it, Jonas nodded. She marked it with my initial. I don't know what's on it, but they tried to kill me for it. A voice came from the far end of the table, a young woman with short dark hair and tired eyes. My name's Lena, she said quietly. I worked with her on the data encryption. If it's the same file, we've been trying to unlock it for months. She called it the Ether Protocol Archive. Jonas set the drive on the table. It looked harmless, insignificant, but the way everyone stared at it made the air hum. Then, let's open it. Lena pulled her laptop closer, her fingers flying across the keys. The screen filled with lines of code. She frowned. It's encrypted beyond anything I've seen. Military grade. But this, she zoomed in on a fragment of data, eyes narrowing. This isn't just encryption. It's biometric. Jonas frowned. Meaning, she tied it to a specific DNA or ID pattern, Lena explained. Only the person she encoded it for can open it. Marcus looked at Jonas, realization dawning. She used you. Jonas's breath caught. Me, Lena nodded. If I had to guess, she used your military ID or service number as a key. It's genius, no one else would ever think to use it. Jonas stared at the screen, 1,000 memories crashing through him. Clara, at her desk, late at night, whispering numbers under her breath. The look she gave him before her last trip, sad, resolute, knowing. His hands shook as he reached for the keyboard. Tell me where to type. Lena pointed to the blinking prompt. Jonas entered the sequence from memory, his old service number, the one etched into the back of every dog tag he'd ever worn. The cursor blinked once, twice, then the lock symbol disappeared, replaced by a single folder. Inside it was a video file titled For J. The room fell silent. Jonas clicked it open. Clara appeared on the screen, her hair pulled back, face pale but calm. Behind her was this same cabin, the same map-covered walls. If you're watching this, she began, it means I didn't make it back. Jonas, I'm so sorry. Her voice trembled, then steadied. I couldn't tell you what I was doing. I had to keep you safe. But the truth matters now more than ever. Aether is killing to protect its research. What's on this drive can expose them. You're the only one I trust to finish this. Jonas couldn't breathe. Her eyes, those same eyes he'd fallen in love with, looked straight through the camera and into him. You once told me that soldiers fight to protect the living. Now it's your turn to protect the truth. The screen went dark. Jonas sat motionless, tears cutting cold lines down his face. Atlas whined softly, resting his head on Jonas's boot. Luna pressed closer, sensing the storm inside him. Marcus laid a hand on his shoulder. She left this fight to you, he said quietly. Jonas looked up, the grief in his eyes, burning into resolve. Then we fight. The room was silent, long after the video ended. The only sound came from the wood stove crackling in the corner, a lonely rhythm that matched the pounding of Jonas's heart. Clara's words hung in the air like smoke, soft, unshakable, final. You're the only one I trust to finish this. He stared at the blank screen until it began to blur, his hands trembling with something deeper than grief. For 6 months he had begged for peace. Now peace was over. War had come back for him, wearing his wife's voice. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. The others flinched at the sudden movement. What's our position? He asked. Voice clipped, focused. Who's here? How many? And what do you have for defense? Marcus exchanged a look with Lena, then slowly nodded, a soldier, recognizing another. 14 people total, Marcus said. Journalists, scientists, a few ex-military. We've got basic rifles, limited ammo, and a generator that barely works. Aether has more resources than a small nation, Jonas. We've been running, hiding, hoping this data would surface someday. Now you've brought them a reason to finish what they started. Jonas glanced toward the window where Atlas sat at attention, eyes fixed on the dark forest beyond. Then we don't run, Jonas said. We make them come to us, and we end it here. The declaration cut through the tension like a blade. Marcus blinked. You want to fight? Jonas turned to face him, expression carved from iron. I want to finish her mission. If they buried this truth deep enough to kill for it, then we'll drag it into the light and make the whole world see. Lena looked up from the laptop, determination warring with fear. Then we'll need a broadcast method. Aether has entire divisions dedicated to misinformation. If we just drop the data online, they'll drown it in noise before it spreads. Jonas nodded slowly. Then we make it impossible to silence. He paced the old rhythm, returning strategy forming with each step. We use redundancy, timed releases, secure mirrors across global media networks. We don't leak it, we flood them. Lena's eyes lit with understanding. A data cascade. Exactly, Jonas said. They can shut down one stream but not 50. Marcus leaned forward, arms crossed. We'll need time, power, encryption strong enough to outlast counterhacks. Jonas looked at him. Then we move fast. For the next several hours, the cabin transformed into a command post. The survivors worked with renewed purpose. Laptops flickered to life. Maps and cables sprawled across tables. Lena's fingers danced over keyboards, scripting timed packet releases, while Jonas and Marcus fortified the perimeter. Atlas and Luna moved from room to room, like sentinels responding to every sound beyond the walls. The atmosphere changed, no longer a sanctuary of the broken, but a war room reborn under the ghost of a woman who refused to stay silent. By midnight, Jonas stood outside surveying the tree line. The stars blazed sharp above the black ridges, cold and merciless. He pulled Clara's photo from his pocket, the same one that had started all of this. The coordinates glowed faintly in the moonlight. She had known. She had left the path for him to follow, even in death. He clenched the picture in his glove. "We're almost there," he whispered. "I'll make them answer." A voice broke through the quiet behind him. "Jonas." It was Lena stepping onto the porch, bundled in a heavy coat. "You should see this." Inside, the glow of the laptop illuminated her face, a mix of triumph and unease. On the screen were columns of decrypted files, each labeled in Clara's precise clinical handwriting. Research logs, payment trails, contracts, all of it linking AetherCorp to covert military operations and falsified death reports. But one file stood out, marked in bold Croft Directive. Lena clicked it open. The top line read, "Authorization for field termination of Asset C Keen. Execute under contingency breach, project exposure imminent." Jonas's stomach twisted. There it was, the order to kill his wife, signed by Julian Croft himself. Marcus swore under his breath. "It's the smoking gun." Jonas stared at the digital signature, his vision narrowing. "Then we burn them with it." Lena hesitated. "Jonas, the signature isn't enough. Croft will call it a forgery. Blame rogue contractors, deny everything. He'll bury us under lawsuits before the truth reaches the surface." Jonas's mind worked fast, the soldier and the strategist merging. "Then we make him prove it's real." "How?" Marcus asked. "By making him talk." Jonas outlined his plan with military precision. Aether's CEO, Julian Croft, was notorious for arrogance. He loved control, loved to prove he was smarter than everyone else. Jonas would bait him into a direct communication under the guise of a blackmail threat. A live video call, routed through encrypted relays. He'd make Croft believe Jonas had the only copy of the data, forcing him to respond personally. During that call, Jonas would trigger the upload, and Lena would record everything. If Croft tried to correct him, if he slipped even once, his own words would confirm the crime. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You're gambling everything on one conversation." Jonas's voice was steady. "No, I'm betting on his ego." They worked through the night, configuring firewalls, setting decoys, testing encryption layers. Lena coded the call route through 7 proxy networks, each one bouncing the signal across continents. The upload sequence was tied to a dead man's switch. Once triggered, the files would distribute to 57 journalists and human rights organizations worldwide. No turning back once it began. By dawn, the camp hummed with nervous energy. The survivors moved like soldiers before battle, their fear tempered by purpose. Marcus handed Jonas a mug of black coffee, his hand steady, but his eyes tired. "You know," he said quietly, "Clara used to stand right there before every transmission. She'd talk to herself. Said it helped her remember what she was fighting for." Jonas gave a faint smile. "I don't need to talk to myself. I've got her voice in my head already." When the first light of day crept through the windows, Lena nodded from the laptop. "Signal ready? Encryption holding? Once you initiate, there's no undoing it." Jonas adjusted the collar of his jacket, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. Atlas sat beside him, ears perked. Luna pressed against his leg, both watching as if they understood what was about to happen. He placed the photo of Clara beside the keyboard. "Let's wake the devil." Lena pressed the key to connect the call. The ringing tone echoed through the cabin, sharp and relentless. Then the screen flickered, and Julian Croft appeared. Perfectly composed in his glass-walled office, silver hair immaculate, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," Croft drawled, lifting a glass of amber liquid. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Mr. Keen. Your wife was quite the nuisance. I hope you're not planning to be the same." Jonas felt his pulse steady, his training taking over. You already know why I'm here, Croft smirked. Of course. You think you've got something that can hurt me. Let me save you some time, you don't. The world believes what I tell it to believe. Jonas leaned forward, voice calm, controlled. Then tell them what really happened on the ridge. Croft's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough. That was a security breach, he said sharply. She knew the risks when she boated. He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air like gunfire. Lena's eyes widened. The recorder blinked red. Jonas's heart pounded. He leaned in, voice cold. You just confessed. Croft's eyes flicked to the corner of his screen, realizing too late that the feed was active. Rage replaced arrogance. You think this little stunt will matter, he snarled. I own the truth. Not anymore, Jonas said. He hit the enter key. Behind Lena, the monitors exploded with motion file. Transfers cascading across servers, encrypted streams firing to every journalist, every outlet on Clara's list. Marcus let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. It's done. Croft's face twisted with fury before the feed cut to static. Jonas sat back, chest rising and falling, the echo of Clara's voice still in his ears. The truth was out. The war was ending the way it always should have, with light. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't over yet. Men like Croft didn't surrender. And as the first distant sound of engines rumbled through the valley, Atlas lifted his head and growled. Luna barked once, sharp and certain. Jonas reached for his rifle, eyes narrowing. Get ready, he said quietly. They're coming. The valley exploded into motion like a beast roused from sleep. Engines answered. Engines distant at first. Then a thunderous chorus that rolled through the trees and made the cabins shudder. Jonas had felt it in his bones before he heard it. The inevitability of men who do not leave quietly. He slid from the window, breath shallow, and the room snapped into the practiced order of soldiers. Marcus barked directions. Lena shouted confirmations. The others moved with a desperate precision born of long months of hiding. Atlas and Luna stood at Jonas's heels, taut and ready, their eyes reflecting the strobe of headlights racing toward the perimeter. They had expected retaliation. They had planned for bullets and for legal attacks and for smear campaigns. They had not underestimated Julian Croft's reach. They had, however, underestimated the speed of the cascade. The moment the files began to move, governments and watchdogs that Clara had nudged awake went into motion. Newsrooms ignited. Once the story spread beyond the reach of a single company, a chain reaction started. Phone calls, subpoenas, and an urgency from a Department of Justice office that could not be bought or bent. Jonas had counted on Croft's arrogance to make him slip. He had not counted on the public to move like a current. Now the vehicles that ripped toward Whispering Hollow were not all of Croft's making. A mass of dark SUVs bore the corporate silhouette, but threaded among them were official sedans, black, discreet, and flanked by the kind of men whose badges gleamed beneath tactical vests. The federal presence arrived like a new tide cutting the prairie with authority. Jonas watched them through the slatted blinds and felt something complex and raw relief, braided with dread. The fight would come either way. Now the battlefield would be split between legality and chaos. The first wave of mercenaries hit the fence with bolt cutters, a flash of hands and cold metal, then hesitation as orders were barked down a chain they could not hear. Someone on the other side of this storm had pulled a knob the contractors had not expected. In the clearing, Croft's men moved like shadows, efficient, trained killers with no moral compass. They spilled over the perimeter and into the compound, and for a breathless instant, everything dissolved into rapid-fire sequences, flashes of muzzle light, splintering wood, and the acrid bite of gunpowder. Marcus and Jonas met in the doorway, rifles raised, and the cabin filled with the necessary violence that men once trained for, but pray never to use. Jonas's world contracted to a heartbeat, target breath squeeze. Atlas launched a black and tan blur, teeth, bared instincts honed across years. He collided with an attacker, sending both to the snow in a shower of white. Luna ran arcs of distraction, her speed and unpredictable angles buying time and space. The compound's old defenses creaked and groaned, but held. Men who had spent their lives running and whispering now fought in the open. Purpose returned like a voice. They were outgunned but not unfocused. Each shot was placed to delay, not to kill. Each movement was a map of carefully learned sacrifice. Then, like thunder splitting sky, a new sound rose above the firefight, the measured rotors of a helicopter cutting through the valley's breath. A spotlight stabbed downward, bathing the cabins in a severe accusing light. A loudspeaker cut in the voice hardened, and official federal agents, "Drop your weapons and identify yourselves." For the mercenaries, the moment of certainty dissolved into panic. They were contractors paid shields in a corporate war. They were not prepared to trade their paychecks for federal jail time. Many dropped their weapons in clattering surrender. A few ran their forms, dissolving into the ranks of trees, but officers blocked the exits and moved with surgical calm. Jonas kept his rifle trained until the last earshot of hostility fell. Only when the immediate danger receded did his shoulders loosen. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Lena came up behind him, cheeks streaked with soot and tears, eyes wild with relief. "They're here," she said. "They're taking statements. Croft's office is getting subpoenas. The journalists, God, so many of them." Marcus exhaled a sound that could have been a laugh if there wasn't so much left to burn. "We did it," he said, voice hoarse. She did it. But victory, Jonas knew, was not a clean thing. The cabin bore holes where rounds had punched through plaster. A window hung like a ragged mouth. One of the younger men had taken a graze to his arm and was being bandaged, fingers shaky as they tied a tourniquet. The celebration in the room was a fragile thing. A collection of exhausted bodies who had stayed alive long enough to see the truth move. Outside, officers combed the property, taking photographs, gathering hard drives, and reading witness statements that would become the scaffold of a case. Jonas walked to the edge of the compound and watched the federal team move with the mechanical certainty of machines built to administer justice. He thought of Clara, the woman behind the files, the quiet strategist who had made the world pay attention. News helicopters circled by dusk, and within hours the valley was not a secret any longer. Reporters' vans lined the access road like a confession. Microphones thrust into the faces of survivors, hands shook, eyes met, everyone speaking the truth at once. Voices braided into 1,000 versions of one story. There was no single triumph, just an avalanche of small clarities, payment trails, internal memos, the Croft Directive, a company culture revealed as predatory and cruel. Croft's empire buckled under the weight. By nightfall, the sequence of arrests began. Executives taken from penthouses and private jets, escorted by agents who read rights with a voice that left Croft incredulous and sputtering. Jonas watched the televised image of Croft in handcuffs. The same man who'd thought himself untouchable, his arrogance stripped down to a pale, frightened face. Jonas felt nothing like glee. The cost had been too high. He thought of the quiet moments, the photo behind the stove, Clara's laugh, the shape of her hand in his, and an ache rose in his chest. Vindication did not stitch the wound. It only told him the wound had been necessary. In the days that followed, the legal machinery churned. Leaks and counterleaks, sworn testimonies and emergency injunctions. Aether Corp stock crashed into freefall, and boards dissolved as executives distanced themselves and prepared statements. But in the valley, something else unfolded. The careful unmaking of a sanctuary into a future. Volunteers arrived with chainsaws and blueprints, lawyers and psychologists, people drawn by the story and stayed by the mission. Marcus, whose shoulders had once been bowed by burden, now stood with plans and permits in hand. Lena took calls from international outlets and structured a secure channel for whistleblowers to reach them. The survivors became trustees and directors, their fear slowly replaced by purpose. Jonas stood one morning on the porch, with Atlas leaning into his thigh and Luna at his feet, the air thin and bright. Across the driveway, men were raising timber frames for a new center. Children, relatives of other survivors ran and tumbled through the thawing snow, their laughter like nails hammered into the foundation of the future. Clara's face, on the same photograph that had once been an engine of pain, now hung in a place of honor inside the new common room. A plaque would be commissioned with her name, but he refused anything that would make it feel like an ending. This was not a tombstone. It was a lighthouse. The organization that grew would be called Clara's Light Foundation, because among those who had known her, the name fit a hard, small flare in the dark that did not go out. They used the legal victory to push for stricter oversight of corporate practices and to create safe channels for whistleblowers. They partnered with journalists and advocacy groups, using the network Clara had built to protect those who chose to stand. The world moved on, as it always does, but not before the truth had been set into the record and the men who'd profited from silence had been named. Months later, as spring loosened the last ice from the creek, Jonas threw a bright ball across the new lawn. Atlas lumbered after it precise and sure. Luna raced like a comet, teeth flashing. They returned, tongues lolling, breath steaming in the cool air. Jonas laughed, a sound that startled him as much as anyone. It was small and private, but it carried a weight of survival. He knelt and ran his hand along their backs, feeling the steady rhythm of two trustworthy hearts that had never left his side. He had walked through fire and come out bearing the faint scars of that flame, and in the ashes he had found a purpose greater than solitude. He thought of Clara, of her stubborn bravery, and the secrecy she'd chosen to gild his life with. He had always wanted peace for himself, a quiet life to lay down his weapons and mend his bones. Instead, she'd given him a mission and a sanctuary that would shelter others from the same cold. He would not have chosen it, but he would honor it. He would keep fighting, not because he was a man hungry for vengeance, but because truth had to be guarded as fiercely as any life. Jonas looked up at the sky, then down at his dogs, and whispered, "We did it, Clara. We kept your light alive." Atlas nudged his hand, and Luna pressed her head to his knee, as if in answer. The valley, once a place of secrets and sorrow, now breathed with a different sound. Hammers and voices, children, and the dull thump of volunteers' boots. The battle was over, the war had changed shape, and from the wreckage a structure of hope rose. In that fragile, stubborn place, Jonas found the peace he had been searching for, not the absence of noise, but the presence of purpose.